Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at our fall series of the Calgary Marketing Association webinar. Of course, my name is Jan. I'm with the Calgary Marketing Association, and joining me today is Hilton Barber. Welcome, Hilton. And Jeff Lowe. Welcome back, Jeff. We just saw you in October. So of course, today we'll be talking about the critical importance of culture and rethinking customer relationship. I see our attendees, the ticker tape is going, everyone is signing on. So let's just literally give everyone a minute to get on and settled in. I will do a little bit of housekeeping. I will formally introduce the two of you, and then Hilton, I'm going to hand over the screen to you. So just a reminder that this is being recorded. It is a live event, but as I said, it is being recorded, and all you folks who have joined us today, everyone who's registered, will receive a copy of this within the next 24 to 48 hours. And this is a provocative presentation. There's going to be a lot of, I believe, interesting points and interesting thoughts going through all of your heads. So please share them with us. We have a Q&A section in this Zoom presentation, and please just jot down your questions, your comments, your feelings, and we've provided lots of time at the end of this presentation, or after Hilton and Jeff complete their PowerPoint, the formal part of the presentation, for conversation, question and answers. So please just bear that in mind. And I would like to just, as always, send out a huge thank you to everyone who is joining us today. Huge thank you to our CMA members, and a heartfelt thanks to our corporate partners. It's been a very, very interesting year, and without the participation of our members and without the support of our corporate partners, we would not be here right now. So huge thank you to our platinum partners, Canada Post and Calgary Economic Development, and a heartfelt thanks to our gold partners, ATB Financial, DAC Group, Vovia, and Post Media. So without further ado, I am going to tell you a little bit about Hilton and Jeff. Hilton Barber is a marketing provocateur. I love that word. Operating at the intersection of strategy, culture, and purpose, Hilton has a passion for creating winning brands. He does this by helping businesses become better communicators with employees, with customers, more effective at creating extraordinary customer experience, and more adept at handling change. Hilton's quote that I love is, "Strategy is the engine, culture is the fuel." And a few of the brands that Hilton has worked with is Coca-Cola, IBM, Nokia, Minto, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst Young, Shaw, McDonald's, TELUS, Enron, and of course, Smart Technologies, which is why it's nice to have Jeff here today. So once again, officially welcome, Hilton.
Thanks very much, Jan. Lovely to be here.
And here we have Jeff. Jeff, if you were lucky enough to be part of our October presentation, panel presentation that Jeff was a part of, you'll know a little bit about Jeff. He is the Executive Vice President, Chief Marketing Officer, and Chief Human Resource Officer of Smart Technology. Jeff is responsible for external brand strategy, marketing, communications, human resources, and facilities. He joined Smart in 2012 and has more than 30 years experience at global brands, including IBM and TELUS. And he has just a great amount of agency experience as well. I'm proud to say that Jeff is a member of our CMO forum and is also on the Calgary Marketing Association Board of Directors. So once again, welcome, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Jan. And I wish I had a title like provocateur, maybe one day.
Well, I was thinking earlier, you should be CCO, Chief Culture Officer.
I am looking forward to this discussion. I think it's a really, really important and interesting discussion. And we've been working on our culture at Smart for a number of years and have done some work with Hilton. So I'm hoping I can bring some practical tips and techniques to folks who are watching today of like, what can you actually do to better your culture? So that's what I see as my role today.
Great. Well, I would now like to hand the screen over to you, Hilton. Jeff, you're here on joining us on gallery view, so I will let you take it away and just go through the presentation. And I look forward to the feedback that everyone is going to provide us.
Well, thank you, Jan, and thank you for everyone who logged in, particularly over lunch. I know under different circumstances, you probably have something delicious from the neighborhood bakery or QSR. Sadly, I'm hoping that all of you have been able to make something delicious for yourself, stuck as you are in your houses. So I do appreciate you taking a break from your bedroom or the front dining room table to join us for today. The notion of why marketing and culture is, I think, two of my primary passions is frankly because I do see culture as a competitive advantage. And as a marketing person for most of my career, the notion of a competitive advantage was always something that I was desperately looking for, whether it was in our product, in our distribution, in our pricing. The notion of trying to find something that would allow us to win in the marketplace was something particularly critical. But I've got to imagine, everyone that's on the call today probably is feeling that marketing, more than almost any other function inside the organization, perhaps with the exception of supply chain, is really at the sharp end of what we're experiencing right now with COVID. When COVID struck, I think a lot of organizations would readily acknowledge that there was some overnight shifts in both consumer behavior and in terms of operations that they had to get right and get right very quickly. This was not something that we could choose to ignore for another quarter or another 2 quarters, as organizations are often want to do, is if we can push it down the road just a little bit, that's okay. But I would suggest that COVID has brought that all to a screaming halt, and that marketing really is at the sharp end of a lot of the expectation of our organizations as we go through this really tumultuous period. I've got to say, maybe I'm a focus group of one, but aren't you bloody exhausted? Do you feel like you've slept since March? If you have, I congratulate you. If you haven't, I empathize deeply with you. But truth of the matter is, we are all on edge, and this feels like a daily battle for all of us, just to keep ahead and to keep doing the very best by our partners, our vendors, and ideally for our customers too. So I've got to tell you, feeling exhausted, that's okay. But I will say, as I said at the start when I was chatting with Jeff and Jan about putting this session together, it struck me that certainly for many marketing folks, I think we unfortunately still have the wrong lens on culture. For any of us who've grown up in the agency world, this little shot from Mad Men is probably how many of us would characterize culture. It's beer cart Fridays, it's vegan muffins in the cafeteria, and who doesn't like a great conga line with all of your employees when you win a new piece of business? But the truth of the matter is, I think that is the wrong, and it's a dangerously inaccurate personification or characterization of what culture really is. Truth of the matter is, culture is a business driver. It is a significant business driver. And it's always very easy to show this fine gentleman, CEO Satya Nadella of Microsoft, because he is perhaps the greatest personification, I would say, in recent history of changing an organization's trajectory based on an impact and recognizing the impact of culture. The famous cartoon on the left-hand side of the screen is one that was doing the rounds for many years in the technology arena, and it was a characterization of the cultures of various technology firms. And if you notice, the Microsoft one essentially is about people pointing guns at each other internally. Now, I don't know what your culture is like, but I've got to imagine, even in Alberta, that you don't take a gun to work to point it at the colleagues in other departments and other divisions. But the folks within Microsoft would contend that was the level of competitiveness inside the organization. If you look on the right-hand side, at the time that Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, the sort of hockey stick, that classic hockey stick growth has been very much driven in his own words. And a fantastic book he's written about it called Hit Refresh is the impact of culture. And it is something that Satya Nadella talks about all the time. He talks about culture and a growth mindset being what would set Microsoft apart and allow that organization to achieve the success that it has. He would contend that culture has been the accelerant for Microsoft's significant growth in the time since he took over. Conversely, though, and I would suggest this is a great Canadian example, that when you get it wrong, it can have real impact too. For many who remember when 3G, the Brazilian private equity firm, took over Tim Hortons, one of Canada's most favorite and beloved QSRs, the cultural impact of those two organizations almost going head to head. Tim Hortons, you know, that wonderful part of every small town in Canada where you got a warm, caffeinated hug when you came in from the lovely people serving you, was suddenly replaced by the good folks at a private equity firm in Brazil saying, what can we do to get more, reduce the cost structure inside this organization? What can we do to take cost out of the ecosystem and the infrastructure? And I think time and again, certainly here in Toronto, many of the Tim Hortons franchisees felt a real struggle to deliver against that consumer experience driven by the culture of their owners, a private equity firm based in Brazil. I would suggest as recently as this week, we've also seen a cultural moment where an organization, Whole Foods, a wholly owned subsidiary of Amazon, and we can hold off any commentary about the culture at Amazon for a brief moment, but just the notion that Whole Foods would tell the employees in Canada that they weren't allowed to wear a poppy, I would suggest is another reflection of how culture can have a significant impact on the people that work for you, and by extension, the people that you serve in the marketplace. And I know certainly here in Ontario, Premier Ford took Whole Foods to task in such a visceral way that they've actually rescinded this decision. But again, you know, this is a moment of culture. Whole Foods press release suggested that they didn't want the poppies because they thought the poppies were a politicization and they didn't want their employees to wear it. Well, I would suggest looking at both my lapel, Jeff's and Jan's, we all know how Canadians really feel about poppies and Remembrance Day tomorrow. So again, a cultural moment and a cultural misstep by a significantly large organization, and I would suggest an organization that's typically pretty damn intelligent. So it shows that you can step right into it if you don't understand these cultural nuances. So I'm often asked how if we've got the wrong lens on culture, so how would you define it, Hilton, in a way that actually personifies or characterizes why it's such a critical business driver? Well, I'll give you this academic definition: how people behave and act, and importantly, make decisions to fit in an organization. And I'd ask you to think for a brief moment inside your organization, regardless of where you sit in the food chain or on the hierarchy, consider for a moment how the people around you act and behave. And importantly, think about the last Zoom call. You know, I'm sure you only had 7 of those yesterday, but think of the last Zoom call that you had and the decisions you were trying to push forward on that Zoom call. And consider for a moment how the decisions were made at the end of that call. Was it the person with the best idea? Was it the person with the most seniority? Was it the person who spoke the loudest? Or was it the person with the great funky South African accent? I mean, these are all how various organizations make decisions. And I would contend that that is a great way to consider what culture really is, why it is a business driver. This is a recent quote that's come across my desk from just a wonderful organization in the United States, a global organization that works in manufacturing and significantly in operations. And this really struck me, particularly as we're all working from home and no longer have that ability to coalesce and congregate in an office. But if you're a leader of an organization, when COVID struck, and as I think like all of us in Canada today are looking as the numbers going in the wrong direction, consider for a moment, how would you answer this question? What is your level of confidence in the edges of your organization? And by that, I don't mean the folks in headquarters or the people within a 5-mile radius of headquarters, but the people on the other side of the country, the people on the other side of the Atlantic. Do you have the same confidence that they will act consistently across the various decisions they have to make in the midst of such an unprecedented time? I would suggest for those organizations who have a really finely tuned and cogent culture, they can probably answer this question with a heightened degree of satisfaction and confidence. But everyone's reality is different. On this call, before this, I had sent out that Survey Monkey, and I appreciate everybody leaning into that. It's really delightful to see, I must say, sitting here in Ontario, to see 40% of you actually answer that COVID has been a rocky start for us, but we seem to have found our flow. 27% of you have said it's too early to say. And I will say, speaking candidly, that I would contend that for many organizations in Canada and certainly in North America, too early to say is probably, I think, the sentiment for many organizations. And if I may, in true Albertan fashion, I've got to thank the individuals who've said, we've been hit bloody hard. The 5% of you who acknowledged that, I'd like to thank you. And for the 3% of you who said, we're pivoting. Because again, I think that is a remarkably candid and probably incredibly honest perspective about what you're having to tackle in the midst of COVID. But I would suggest at the same time, is all of this culture thing really a priority? Some of the other questions I asked you were related to the behaviors inside your organization and how you use values, which will be something that Jeff talks about when he gets into his section, because it's been a pivotal turnaround inside SMART about how to align behaviors to actions and outcomes. But again, as I look at this, the interesting thing that I'm struck by is only 38% of you suggested that your values are actually an important and critical part about how you make decisions. And only 44% of you, 1 in 2, less than 1 in 2 of you, could say that inside our organization, our values and associated behaviors are both defined and well understood. And I think you can appreciate why I might contend that that is a concern for any executive on this call. The thing that most struck me, and that's why I've got them in green, is when I asked you in the same survey, how many of you would ask your friends and family to buy the goods or services your company makes? 3/4 of you said absolutely, but only 2/3 of you said the same friends and family I would like to work at my organization. And I would suggest that kind of advocacy, or perhaps that lack of advocacy, is also quite telling. So if that's all of this, really, how should I be thinking about my culture? And what is the way to think about my culture? Well, increasingly over the past 4 years or 5 years, when I've been digging deep into this topic, I've really come and have been impressed by the work of numerous luminaries in the culture space, who time and again would suggest your culture really is and should be considered as an organism, a living and breathing human organism. Why is that? Well, because it's made up of the behaviors, emotions, and acts of humans. This is not a server farm. This is a bunch of humans. And by the same token, those humans are sitting and looking at the environment in which they work. And they are looking for cues and signals from the organization. If I act in this way, will I be rewarded? Will I be promoted? Or will I be ridiculed? What are the pros and cons of acting in this fashion when I'm in a meeting, when I'm with a partner, when I'm with a colleague? How should I act and behave? And what is the concern that I have that I'll be promoted or that I will be ridiculed? That is an ongoing thing that your people subconsciously are testing the water of your culture at all times. Not surprisingly, we should anticipate that they're therefore quite skeptical, because I would imagine many on this call, and heaven knows I've been that person, starts every year with a triumphant, here is our plan for 2021. Here is a wonderful strategy that's going to kick the butt of our competitors, make us more money than God, and make us idols across the business community. And your culture looks at you and says, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but didn't you tell me that last year? And didn't you tell me that that strategy last year was going to be brilliant? And then 3 months later, you sold off that division that my best friend was in, and you downsized us by 40%. Why should I believe you this time? When the last time you told me this, you didn't follow through. And I would suggest, not surprisingly, your culture also sits there with a degree of concern, particularly now in these heightened emotional times where financial security is of concern to everybody, that the folks inside your culture are sitting and thinking, can I believe management? Can I trust that this strategy is going to win in the marketplace? And what exactly are they expecting of me? Because when COVID struck and we all went home, I noticed that I was on Zoom calls from 7 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, 5 days in a week. And then I got a very fantastic email on Friday from HR saying, this company really is concerned about balance. Your balance and your mental well-being is of particular concern to us. We look forward to that Zoom call at 7 a.m. on Monday morning, where we can remind you of just how much we care. So I would contend, as always, what we say to our organization, what we say to our people, and then how we act. When there is a dichotomy between the two, we can't expect that our culture doesn't respond with degrees of fear and skepticism. Ultimately, what we want, though, from our people are their full commitment. This is Rob Chestnut, the world champion of hot dog eating. Now, if there's a person more committed to his craft than this man, I'd love to know who that is. But classically, when we want the commitment of our people, their creativity, their inspiration, their innovation, what we often get is their apathy. What we often get is no thank you. Or what we often get is a marked lack of their discrete input. And I think that's not surprising, because if you consider, we often treat our culture like an American in a taxi cab in Paris. That when the taxi cab doesn't go the way that we go, we start to speak louder and louder and shout and pretend that our culture is too dumb to understand how brilliant our strategy is, that our culture is too ignorant to believe that what we've just created is not the most magnificent business document in recorded history. And when we've finished beating them to death with that strategy, then we campaign it to death inside the organization. When we don't actually recognize that we need to work with our cultures to get what we want from them. So I would contend, I still believe and would contend that if we're able to get our cultures working in concert with the strategies that we spend so much time creating, that it is a competitive advantage. Why? Because no other company can copy your culture. No other company has your culture. No other company can steal your culture. It is yours and yours alone. The question is it working to your best advantage? Or is your culture actually an impediment for what you're trying to get done in the market? This is another part of that survey, and again, I would suggest this is kind of interesting. When I asked, and in fairness, I will say it was a trick question on SurveyMonkey. I said, which of these do you think are related to your culture? And again, perhaps not surprisingly, engagement and productivity was the answer that many of you gave. But I would contend that every single part of this is actually an impact or an outcome of your culture. Your ability to innovate is driven by your culture's belief that if it fails, if it tries something for the first time, which is part of innovation, and it fails, that's okay. But if it feels that when it fails, the culture will be roundly slapped about the head by the executives, we can't be surprised when innovation doesn't flourish inside our organization. And I would suggest that hiring and training of new employees equally, if you don't think the difficulty there is in attracting great talent to your organization is not part of your culture or an outcome of your culture, then again, I would suggest we are missing that critical lens. And then finally, if everything we do that meets the customer reflects our culture, then I would suggest that customer satisfaction is often the ultimate outcome of getting our culture right. And that if we don't, as marketers, this is perhaps the principal reason I would suggest any of us want to be involved in this. Because what happens with our culture impacts what happens with our customers. And that is at the core of our jobs. So why should marketers lead? I'll go through this section quite quickly, and then I very much want to pass it over to Jeff to talk about his experiences with Smart. So I would say there are 5 reasons why marketers should lead, and 5 that make the most sense for me. Firstly, inherently, culture is an exercise in communication. And everybody on this call, I presume or anticipate, is probably a masterful communicator in their own right. And culture very much is an exercise in getting your communication, internal communication, right. And then, to use the Satya Nadella example, communicated at every given opportunity. The other thing is, and particularly now as we're all sitting in our bedrooms and our dining room tables, working and having work that fills us with meaning, that makes us actually feel delighted and engaged at the end of the day, that we're actually having a positive impact on the world, that the work that we do matters, I think again is a primary motivator for many people. And that is something that has nothing to do with generations. I certainly know in my time working with Jeff, he is somebody who is at the forefront of wanting purpose to be very much part of what SMART talks about and what SMART stands for. And I certainly know inside that organization, galvanizing that purpose has been critically important for the organization. And then frankly, guys, who else gets behavior change better than marketers? I mean, this is what we do. We try to anticipate the behaviors of our consumers. At every single moment, we are trying to drive consumer behavioral change, to pick our product more often than our competitors, to pay the price that we believe it should be charged over what the competitors do, to go to the store where our goods are sold versus the store where they're not on the shelves. That is entirely about behavioral change. And as marketers, that's a critical aspect of what we do every day. But equally, who gets emotion better than us? And I would suggest, again, as we sit and think about the emotions running through the consumer audiences that we seek to serve, emotions, as we all know intuitively, emotions drive behaviors. And if behaviors are at the core of a cogent and great culture, who the hell knows that better than the marketing folks? And finally, and I'm quoting directly from a dear friend of mine, Stan Slapp, and for everyone on the call, I would strongly encourage you to pick up his book, Under the Hood, that's up in the top right of the screen. But I think we would all agree that if you can't you can't sell it outside if you can't first sell it inside. And I think that has been the most profound recognition that I've come to believe in my years working in culture. And certainly, as Jan said at the head of this call, for somebody who used to work with both Enron and Nokia, I would suggest I've seen upfront the direct impact of what happens when a culture is misaligned to the business outcomes that they're seeking. So those would be the reasons that I believe that marketing should be at the center of any exercise to do with culture. But I wanted to switch over now to talk to the experience that Jeff and I had working on the culture at Smart together. So Jeff, over to you, mate.
Thank you very much, Hilton. And even though I've heard Hilton give this talk both publicly and just to Smart several times, I still find it just as fascinating and important every single time. What I want to do now, guys, is switch from this this topic of theory and talk about practical execution. Many of you are sitting there and you probably have a role to play within your organization's culture, and you say, well, hopefully by now you've been convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that culture is the heartbeat of your company, and that is actually your only sustainable competitive advantage. That's something that we certainly believe. So what do you do? And how do you break it down, and pragmatically, what are some steps that you can take? We've been on this journey for 3+ years at Smart, where we really focused our attention on culture in a very robust way. And by no means are we experts at it, or we have it all solved and sorted. But we are seeing some real tangible gains in our culture that I can share with you. But as I go through just a short talk here of 5 or 10 minutes, just think of I'm going to show you some exercises of actually, here's some things that we did that I think any company can do and should do to get a better handle on improving their culture. So before I start, just if just to keep it at a super high level to start with, there's 4 things that I think are imperative when it comes to how do we move our culture forward, and how do we get better with our culture. They're in the top right hand of this slide. Is first of all, Hilton was talking about, like, is it a marketing leadership thing? And 5 very good reasons of why marketing should lead. Obviously, there's a key role for HR to play. I would submit that executive commitment, all executives have to commit to this topic. This has to be a boardroom commitment in order for it to work. That's number 1. Number 2 is, that said, while it needs to be top-down commitment, it's bottomed up in terms of the implementation. So one of the things we've done, I'm not going to focus a lot on this in this talk, but we've done a lot of grassroots culture teams where we turn a challenge over to the teams to self-form and come up with solutions. And guess what? They're better solutions than the exec team could ever come up with on their own. And they're really core within the teams. The third one, Hilton talked about this, shared purpose, absolutely critical. This is the intersection of brand and culture and HR all together, right? Is what's your purpose as a company? And then for each individual employee, what is their purpose? And do they see their purpose in what the corporate purpose is? And so we spent a lot of time on that, and it's really impactful work. And then the fourth one, and I do want to stop on and give a bit of a drill down on number 4 here, is a behavior framework. Is behaviors are everything, as Hilton said. So how do you actually put a finer point on that and be explicit with your team on what the behaviors are within your company that are going to drive everything you do within your organization? So with that said, let me go through and talk a little bit more about behaviors. I would say as we started out our journey on culture, we did have some skepticism. And we actually worked with Hilton and some other folks on doing offsites and workshops, and this is an investment. And we did get some skepticism from our senior leaders saying, really, we're going to spend a whole offsite on culture? Like, can't we just cover that off in an hour or 2? Because we got some pretty big issues with competitive threats, supply chain, sales issues in certain regions. And again, that executive commitment of, no, this is critical. Yes, we are going to spend this time. And it's not just the soft and fluffy stuff, because that's what people expect coming in. This is a conversation about business. And this is actually going to drive our business results. So this is what people typically think of, right? Is we've got a great culture. Our culture is super fun. We even put a slide in for our software developers. They just love it. We have beers and cheers every Thursday afternoon. We put in a foosball table. We've got a great culture. No, that's not what culture is. This is a very, very small part of culture. Is, just to strip it down to what I believe is the bare bones, culture equals behaviors. How we behave with each other as team members, how we behave with our customers, our suppliers, our partners. One by one, these behaviors stack on top of each other into this ball that is your culture. And then in green here is, I think, the best quote ever in existence on culture, which is, culture is the worst behavior you tolerate. And I just think if you think about that and think about your own organization, it's what do you tolerate? And that actually defines what your culture is. So again, what do you do about all of this? So one of the things that we found is, again, it's about behavior. Culture is about behavioral change. And those who actually say we want to change our culture, but we're not prepared to change our behaviors, they're not going to get any farther ahead. So working with Hilton, we actually studied some of the companies that they have committed to culture and it's driven their business results. This is empirical evidence. These three organizations and many others have basically made it a corporate mandate of, we are going to invest in our culture. And they've not only made it a great place to work for their team members, but they've actually driven an exponential change in their business results, as shown by that graph that Hilton showed for Microsoft, but also for Netflix and Southwest. If we go on a little bit further on Netflix, values versus behaviors, right? So values are super important, but behaviors are more important. And this is another quote that I love from Reed Hastings: "We don't tolerate brilliant jerks. The cost is just way too high." So one of the things that Netflix did, which I'll be honest, we just blatantly copied, is they made what they call a behavioral framework. So here what you're looking at is something from Netflix that says, one of our values is selflessness. We value being selfless. Fantastic. What does that actually mean? How do you know when you see selflessness? What does that look like? What does it feel like? So then they've basically codified it, right? Is that when you're making time to help colleagues, you're being selfless. When you seek what's best for the company versus your own team or yourself, that's being selfless.
And Jeff, if I may add to that, I think the crucial part and the part that we discussed at length with SMART was, many organizations can put up a set of words as values that they believe are critically important. And I think that if anybody on this call was to look at values like trust and integrity, they might suggest that it's probably somewhere in the list of values inside their organization. But the reality is every value inside your organization has your own unique definition of it. I wonder if your organization was to characterize what selflessness meant for your company, whether you would come up with these 4 that Netflix did. And that's often the critical moment, is where you put up a value and you assume that everybody's definition and interpretation of that value is identical. And that can be a real worry. And that was certainly part of the conversation that we had with SMART, and the work that Jeff and his team were very keen to get into.
Exactly. So I want to take you through a workshop that we did with Hilton. And again, consider what this might look like for your company, because this is all too doable for any company. Again, if you have the commitment to do it. So here, what you're looking at here with this diagram, these are the SMART values. These values, this is not new. These values have existed for as long as I've been at SMART, so at least a decade. I would submit, like Hilton said, some of you probably have these exact same values in your own stated values. We value customer centricity. We value accountability, being curious. I think before we did some exploration on this, if you would ask 500 smart employees around the world, what does this actually mean? You'd probably get about 500 different answers. So what we did is we did a workshop. We had an offsite. It was actually in a remote area. No internet, no Wi-Fi. So this is old school. This is flip charts and yellow sticky notes. But what you're looking at is to say, okay, let's break this down. So let's look at take one of your values. Okay, so for us, take something like accountability. Just go back for a second if you could, Hilton. What's happening right now is there's 5 tables and they're all brainstorming on what the heck is a behavior that exhibits the value of accountability. And basically this is brainstorming. So fire as many ideas on a yellow sticky note as you can on what is a behavior that exhibits the value of accountability. Next step is you can only put 3 on the board. Okay, so each table gets up, go ahead, and you can see these boards around the room, and it's 5 rows of 3 stickies basically of here's the top 3 from each table. And then what happens is everybody in the room gets to come up and put their red dot around the one that they say, yes, this behavior, this makes a ton of sense of a behavior for this value. So you can see on the right-hand side here under execution, there's one in particular that people are saying, oh, this is a perfect way to state a behavior that maps up to that value, okay? So then what we did after the workshop.
And Jeff, if I may add, the wonderful thing about this setting was the cross-functional teams that got to agree. And in Smart's case, from marketing to operations to the guys developing software, they got to agree and furiously debate. Yeah. I mean, the wonderful thing is that my invoice typically includes a Kevlar jacket, depending on the setting. But that kind of debate and discussion is absolutely critical for the organization to align on. When we talk execution here, we all agree that this is the kind of behavior that means inside this organization.
Yeah, this was our senior leadership team from all around the world, and we did. I think we had 3 values done, and then we had timed out on the day, and it was like 5 o'clock, and there was beer and wine waiting in the next room, and we kept going for hours because of the passion around people wanting to complete the exercise. So then what we did, we combine all this, we map it. Here's the number 1, 2, and then 3, because these yellow stickies are kind of saying the same thing. So then if you go to the next slide, we then took this back into the boardroom. And so even after this workshop with this cross-functional leadership team, this is an exec team meeting. So exec hours all the time, right? I don't know that they meet all the time on behaviors and culture. But this is the CFO, this is the head of legal, this is the head of engineering, not just marketing and HR, talking about let's now synthesize these down into how we're going to go out back to the team and state this. So the resulting framework is, for each value, it looks something like this, is there's 3 behaviors. And if you look at the language is from the team, and it's meant to be conversational. It's meant to be something that people would actually say. And in fact, that's what's happened at Smart, is this has become the vernacular of our company. And you hear these behaviors all the time. So be a player, believe you can change the game. That's a behavior that attaches up to our value of being accountable. The one on the right, when passing the baton, ensure your teammate picks it up. It's a metaphor, obviously, but it's a mental image that has just woven its way into how we talk at Smart. And we've even had things where we've had literal batons going around the world with photo opportunities from Germany to China to the United States. It's because of the conversational nature. It's not just something that's sounds academic or sounds corporate. It's actually that grassroots level of conversational style that I was talking about earlier. So if you take, this is one value, we had 6, if you remember. So if you put it all together, here's the map, right? So this is what we call our behavioral framework. It's an incredibly important document at Smart. And it's not here's a nicely designed poster that we put behind our reception. It's actually a map for how we make decisions, for how we rate our team members, for how we do recruiting. And it's not a day goes by that you don't see or hear about this within the company. And to tell you a little bit more about that, on the next slide, you'll see kind of a list of things that we've done around this. So obviously there's a launch element to the whole company. Global town halls. We actually held an entire week. We called Vision, Values, and Behaviors Week to roll this out. We use this for recruiting and onboarding. So are potential employees exhibiting or able to exhibit these behaviors? And then for training, here's formal training on what all these values and behaviors mean. We track this on our annual engagement survey. So when we ask the team how they're doing and what their overall engagement is like, part of our survey is these two questions. In 2019, out of all these behaviors in the framework, which is the best one that we're exhibiting and doing a great job of exhibiting that behavior? On the right-hand side, the flip side of that coin is, which ones are we not exhibiting as much as we should? And so you get the kind of top three on the right-hand side. And then if you go back, Hilton, point number 4, I think it is or point number 5, is then we have teams that are assigned to saying, okay, we'd like to see more of this behavior. How might we do that? And teams self-form and bring recommendations back into the rest of the company. And then last but not least is performance evaluations. Is when we have performance evaluation conversations with our team at SMART, it's not just what you're doing, have you met your objectives? It's how are you doing it? Are you exhibiting the behaviors that are part of our culture? And that's half of your evaluation as much as what objectives you're achieving. So this is a really, really important part of our culture. So here's our journey from an employee engagement perspective over the past 6-7 years. So not just because of what I just showed you, that there's one element in terms of the behavioral framework, but the executive commitment, some of the other things I haven't talked about as much in terms of shared values, grassroots teams that really act on engagement feedback have risen us up to now where we're in well above the high-tech company benchmarks, the best engagement scores that we've seen at SMART. Of course, we have lots of room for improvement. It'll be very interesting. We're just about to get our 2020 results in a COVID year to see how we're doing. But hopefully I've been able to share some things in terms of what is working for us that you can take away and maybe think about how to do in your company.
Jeff, I know I have seen those results previously, and I have to commend you guys for that commitment, because I think you're absolutely right. That leadership commitment, leadership commitment over the long haul.
Yeah,
is exactly what I think has allowed you to see the results that you have. This is not a one and done exercise, as Jeff will attest. This is a constant refine, modify, improve, enhance. And again, by two quick things to leave you before we get into the Q&A. I mean, this wonderful gentleman, Lou Gerstner, if for anybody on the call will likely remember, was the gentleman tasked with turning around the fortunes of IBM. And in his book, Dancing with Elephants, he would suggest everything that he did or was able to do at IBM was because of culture, and that every challenge he faced was because of culture, and every success that he was able to finally push through was because of culture. So culture really isn't just one aspect of the game. It is the game. And always leaving you with this, one of my favorite little cartoons or memes on the topic. Culture is the engine. Culture is what will enable your organization to succeed, because culture is what enables your people to succeed. And that is the most critical thing that any business needs to survive. And that is your sustainable competitive advantage.
Oh, okay, everybody take a breath. Please, everyone, Mark, I see that a question from you. Folks, just take a moment and whatever questions you have, we have 5 to 10 minutes to answer your questions or respond to your comments. Everyone goes back to their working world, calls a meeting for tomorrow morning and wants to have a conversation with their team, their company, their crew about culture. What is step one?
Step one, I would always suggest is understanding the culture that you have today. That's the same. It may sound pithy, it may sound remarkably rudimentary, but the reality is there is no good or bad culture. There just is the culture you have today. Mm-hmm. The question you have to ask is our culture getting in the way of delivering our strategy? And the only way you will know that is you really understand your culture. And with respect to all the senior leaders on this call, often the senior leaders are the least objective about their culture. And it's typically the people furthest removed from the corner office who really understand how the culture manifests. Right. So that would always be step number one. Do you really know objectively the culture you have today? And then how does it need to be modified, refined, improved, or transformed? But you've got to start with what you have today.
Thank you. Okay, Marcus' question is, I love the idea that culture is fuel and that values are important. Having said that, so many corporate values are the same as other places. If we're trying to differentiate brands through an organization's cultural fuel, how do we do that if cultural values aren't that different from one organization to another?
I'd go back to the same exercise we did with SMART.
Right.
You know, we sat in a room and we asked people to tear apart that value of accountability. What does it mean here? So the word can be, the words can be relatively the same. But again, the question and the exercise we did with SMART was also, was there anything missing? Is there a value as we went through this discussion that we felt was happening around here that hadn't been captured? Because that again is equally part of the exercise. So I would again come back to the values that you have. How do they drive, or how would you like them to drive the behaviors inside your company?
We have a lot of smaller companies in Calgary. A lot of, the last few years have fueled a lot of startups. Mm-hmm. Is it the same when you have a sole proprietor? You just have to work on your own culture, but small companies, medium-sized companies, large companies, is it all just the same steps that you go through?
Absolutely. I mean, and certainly it's potentially easier if there's a smaller group of you than if you're 500 people globally speaking 12 languages as they are at SMART. Mm-hmm. The exercise remains the same. I come back to this principal point. What we want from our people is their commitment. That's what we want. Mm-hmm. We want their creativity, we want their ideas, we want their passion, we want their drive. That's what we want. And they will give it to us if we're prepared to give them what they need first. And that's your exercise with culture. What is it going to take to create an environment where the very best of our people can thrive? And I commend Jeff and his team at SMART for looking to that and making it crystal clear. This is what you need to do to thrive in this environment. And we are going to help you by creating that environment. So I would suggest whether you're a founder and there's 5 of you, or you're Jeff and there's 500 of you, This is too important an exercise to leave to chance. You wouldn't leave any other part of your organization's growth to chance, would you? You would sweat the details. And I would encourage everyone here to sweat the details of your culture, because that will personify the commitment of your people. And right now, in COVID, the commitment of your people is the thing you most desperately need for your organization to thrive.
So Jeff, 3 years down the road, any lessons learned, any changes that you, or adjustments that you made, anything that really stands out for you in this journey?
Well, there's a couple of things we haven't talked that much about that I think are really important. One is the purpose part, and having a shared purpose, right? So what's your why? And then how does each individual, whether you have 5 employees or 500 or 5,000, how do they articulate themselves what that purpose is? And COVID has just really made that even ultra important. And so again, that's an exercise that there's a pragmatic way to break that down and say, here's our purpose as a company, here's our why. What's your why? If you're Betty in accounting, or George in engineering, or in sales, how does that apply to you? Because organizations that have that shared purpose among their team members, they have a much stronger culture. And then the other thing, Jan, that we've really learned again is sometimes giving the culture to the team to figure out from the ground up is the best way to do it, right? So when we come up and we get feedback on how do we need to be better within our organization, with employee surveys and the like, is to be 100% transparent with the team and say, okay, well, here's what you're telling us in terms of some of the things we need to work on with our culture, or with what it's like to work at Smart. Who would like to volunteer to help solve this? Because we sure don't have the answers. And so what we found is people are happy, like this slide says, to put up their hand and say, I want to be part of that team. I'm really passionate about helping to fix this. And these teams self-form and they bring forward solutions and they deliver it to the company. So sometimes you have, as a leader, you have the notion of, I got to go fix this and I got to manage this. Sometimes giving it to the team is the best approach.
Giving them the skin in the game, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We are a few minutes away from 1 o'clock, and I do want to honor timing. Kirsten Bolton has asked, in your workshop, Jeff, does the company, well, I guess Jeff and Hilton, does the company executive provide the high-level values, and according to whom, and then the staff comes up with the behavioral top 3? I think you may have answered that just now, Jeff, but I just want to make sure that Kirsten has what she needs. Yeah,
like we had the values at Smart, and so those had been existing, like I said, for a decade, and then the team came up with the behaviors in this collaborative exercise with voting and stickies and so forth. If you came in with a blank slate, then I think it would be best if the team came up with both the values and the behaviors.
Perfect. All right. Any last words, Hilton, on that?
No, I mean, Jeff's point is well made. Some organizations have stopped at values and then not dug into what those behaviors are. Some have dug into behaviors and probably recognized that they may need to be updated or modified for where the business is today. It's okay to start from wherever. I think, again, back to my earlier point, you've got to start with the culture you have today and you move according to that, because everybody on this call is going to go back to a culture inside their organization. That's just a reality. The question is that culture serving you and accelerating your recovery and your business success? If it isn't, then you've got work to do.
Right. Oh, thank you. Okay, we are just coming up to 1 o'clock. I want to thank both of you, Hilton and Jeff, for taking time out of your incredibly busy and complicated schedules, days, and sharing this. It is, it's so simple and yet so complicated. I would just like to let everyone know, remind everyone once again that we are recording this and we'll send out the recording. Hilton is a very, very available person. If you have any other questions, I know that if you just go on LinkedIn and reach out to him, he's always there, and it's just so gracious with his time and his information. So please reach out, and thank you again, Hilton and Jeff. And I do just want to say that we have a couple of more webinars coming up, and then we have a couple of more to announce before the end of the year, and we're actually working on January as well. Something exciting on November 24th is it's titled Getting Noticed, and it's really it's Danielle Dorion and Christy Thomason, who are two subject matter experts in the field of customer-centric marketing success. They will be presenting. Take a look on the website. We're open for registration, and it's filling up quickly. This is an intriguing topic to cover these days. And then on December 9th, we have Gartner coming in to talk about rethinking customer relationships, a beautiful tie into this cultural conversation we've had. I asked him the question. I asked Brent Adamson, who will be presenting. He's the vice president at Gartner. I said, can you talk to us about predictions for 2021? And he said, the only prediction I can give you is it's impossible to make predictions, and it's going to be for a long time. So let's just give ourselves a lot of really good information and materials to work with. So that's December 8th. We have it up on our website. Take a look at that. We hope to see you then. And other than that, once again, thanks to all of you for joining us. Head on to our website. If you're not on our email list, please do sign up. And I just wish you all a very good day and look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.